Naomi, why don't you pray for us?
Father, we are here this morning to, Lord, honor each other, Lord, and to honor you. Lord, may we continue to build each other closer to you and continue just to seek out your will for each one of our lives. Lord, and begin to truly see each other as, Lord, your sons. Lord, we thank you for what you are doing in each time, Lord, in each heart. Lord, may we make each moment, Lord, precious, Lord, for the life and purpose that you have planted in each life. Lord, we bless your name and just, Lord, thank you for this time, and may you bless it. Amen.
Amen. I don't have any specific topic or discussion point today, but I'm not sure it would be helpful in the future for that to be expected of me either, because I want this to be a time that we plan to bring things to share, I guess, because I don't want this to be too similar to other times in that one person is expected to lead it. I can do my best to facilitate the conversation, but I think we had resolved to go over things that are like being taught during our culture center time, if there's any thoughts that come up from that. And of course it works out well too, because it's still pretty fresh in our minds since it's only the previous day. And then also wanting to share observations of the community, which is also it's also kind of an ideal time to do so, because at least currently we meet together right before worship night. So there are even things maybe we can inspire in one another during this time to share during worship time. Not that that has to be a set thing, but it only just comes to me that the timing of this meeting is interesting, and that it immediately follows our culture center time and immediately precedes the worship night. So anyways.
Yeah, I've been thinking about what you brought up yesterday in your time, just with honor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, like, what put it on your heart to bring that up and to discuss it with us? Like, is there a situation, or have you just been thinking about it in general?
This was in part inspired by an incident, I guess. It's a very small one, and it's not really worth going into detail about, simply for the sake of, I guess, honoring the person that I dealt with, but it was not anything all that important, I guess, as far as its impact on myself or the class or anything. It just was something that led me to this this topic of the importance of honor. It's not a new thing, but it's something that we haven't touched on in some time now, which is important because, as I mentioned during that discussion yesterday, it is a large and very significant part of what we're doing in the Culture Center together, what we're trying to foster and what we're wanting to practice. And it's so easily lost too if it's not approached together, like consciously as a subject of interest and import, because it's one of those things that we can assume that we're doing without thinking about it. And though we want to get to that point, I know we haven't arrived there yet. And so when it's not reiterated, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
as a group, then we kind of lose. It kind of loses its touch and its prevalence in our minds and hearts. So, do
Yeah.
any of you guys recall a conversation that we've had about honor before? Because there have been several.
I don't remember too much of what was said, but I do remember Emmanuel talking about it a couple times, I think, during our analytic times.
The analysts, yeah.
There's also when he addressed us as a class in regards to the paper towels. Obviously,
Mhm.
started by a small thing, but
What was I unfortunately was not there for
I
any
think
of
it was
that.
toilet paper not being replaced or something. And
yeah,
I think even in that it wasn't just about.
I know
that.
it was
That was-
That's what I'm saying. It was
yeah.
a series of events that led up to
I
that.
think that
being
was
the last straw.
a symptom of a greater issue.
Yes.
Probably. Not the actual issue.
What were you saying?
and he in that kind of talked along those same lines of, like, what are we doing here? If we're not even doing small things like that, it shows a way of thinking from, especially a lot of the younger ones, a way of thinking that is not honorable and that is kind of in your own world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Emmanuel would often speak of honor as he described it in many ways, but one way that stood out to me and has stuck with me is that it's like the foundation or the pillar that upholds a culture. You can't sustain a culture, much less build one, without honor.
Man, I really wish I got a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, there was a lot of very intriguing conversations surrounding culture in particular. There was,
That word is just a lot more prevalent in the culture he grew up in
yeah,
than to our society. I mean, it's
Mhm.
a word that's hardly ever said outside of maybe competitiveness and things like that.
yeah, yeah. There was a few years where we would approach that subject and related subjects such as honor and learning how to learn and such things, like very objectively, not in a as if it was a matter of head knowledge per se, but when we kind of first began classes with Emmanuel in more of a teacher-student setting, those were some of the first and the greatest subjects of interest to us. Then in later years, there was not as much direct conversation, but it always came up as
It needs to be
themes.
reminded.
Yeah, that we were and still are familiar with, but those were some very special times with Emmanuel, because it was something that the Lord had really pressed on his heart, and which he was. You can tell when there's a theme that the Lord puts in someone's heart, and regardless of where or how a conversation begins, what it's about, it always leads back to it.
I've definitely been in scenarios
Yeah.
like that for sure.
Yeah, and it was one of those subjects for a good amount of time. Yeah, well, I mean, it was important, and it still carries a great importance, but
Mhm.
the way that the Lord teaches us is not, I mean, if you consider God's manifold wisdom, there's a time and season for
Oh, for sure. Mhm.
specific subjects. It's not when, but that's not to say that when the Lord moves to begin to,
The other thing ceases to be important.
yeah,
It's just not the focus of the time. Yeah, I understand that completely. I've thankfully gotten to witness that change of season myself with
it's
those
interesting to
subjects.
navigate too when there are new hearts and minds that become involved in the community and in that flow of teaching, how we are to how we're to bring up things that were taught before, not that we're trying to go back to previous lessons so that you can catch up to where we're at now. That's obviously not the way that spiritual teaching works per se. There are fundamentals, there are key principles to become familiar with, but one thing that is always important to understand right away is that the Lord is the ultimate teacher of those things. We can bring up specific things in conversation, but so much of it is guided by what the Spirit inspires in an individual's heart, where their interests lie.
That also reminds me
A
of
type of receiving heart.
something Nicole was telling me when I first was joining the community center and things like that, which was that me not having hardly any instruction or teaching from a manual was intentional on the Lord's behalf, because it was the signal of a new season, and I was going to be one of the people that had to lead that charge, and that obviously is stepping away from his teaching now that he's no longer here, but it's a different way of thinking. I honestly, I wish I recalled more of it, but that stuck out to me, thinking that like it was intentional on the Lord's behalf that I didn't get any of his direct teaching. Obviously, I'm getting what you guys are passing from him through yourselves, but I do wonder about that sometimes as to what the intention was there. Obviously,
I think that I could speak out of my bounds here, but I think God obviously knows all, but I think God was working with what was and what turned out to be. I don't think there was never an opportunity for you to have.
well, that's what I was thinking, but Nicole said no, it was intentional on God's. Like she said that to me several times on several different occasions. That's how I thought as well, for sure. It's like, no, it wasn't intentional, but he can definitely use the circumstance, which is true of a lot of things. But Nicole said no, this was intentional, that you did not receive any instruction from him. So I'll have to ask her more of her on it at another date to get be able to paint a more clear picture. But that was something strange to me that I recall she pointed out. Because at the time I was feeling very guilty of that I did not, because I took too long, that I felt like I missed my opportunity of someone great. And I don't think she was simply consoling me. I don't think it was just a matter of, I don't think that's who she is. I think she was telling me something that was true. Whether I don't quite understand it, but I do trust her in that.
Well, this concern, if you think about it, quietly carries an assumption that Emmanuel was the ultimate source of teaching.
Oh yeah, not at all.
But of course we understand that's not true. There was a time and place or a season for Emmanuel to serve as a vessel for sharing and imparting God's instruction, God's heart concerning specific things. And that one very encouraging and enlightening thing that was said a short time following Emmanuel's passing is that his impact on our lives is going to be something we discover as our lives progress. We have not even seen the full extent of it.
Sorry.
And again, we're not talking just about a man. We're not simply
What he-
praising or
what-
extolling an individual human, but really, we're talking about a vessel used by and filled by God's Spirit. And with this in mind, we can only thank and give any credit at all to God and what he did through this man. And really the only thing that we can praise concerning Emmanuel is his obedience to the Lord. That's a thing also we can desire to emulate, that we can long to see in ourselves, learn to yield in the same way that Emmanuel did. And that's not at all a light thing to say. That's a
Oh, for sure. He was.
But anyways,
No,
the Lord will show us what we need to know as far as these ongoing topics, if you will, that have been inspired by the Lord, such as building a culture, learning to, in ourselves and then ultimately through our families and community, foster a way of life. And the vision is often the thing that we start with, and the way that the Lord teaches us, either directly or through others, is kind of the filling in of those gaps as far as the Lord is willing and sees fit to fill them, to let those details play themselves out. And what you may be missing, if I can put it that way, is at least by not having Emmanuel around anymore, is the filling in of those gaps in the way that Emmanuel could.
But I think that will be accomplished in other
Right.
ways, certainly.
And that is by God's intent. And I would say that pretty much everything that Emmanuel shared along these lines has been recorded.
Oh,
So
yeah,
interestingly enough, it's all there.
I've watched. I think it was more of, not necessarily that I would miss out on what he had said, but more of just natural questions that arise in my life
Sure.
and things like that. Just not having. I think he was an amazing resource. You know what I mean? And so it wasn't necessarily. I obviously I did not feel like I now lost my chance, because it wasn't. It was not the man, as you said. It was a vessel. But it was more of the feeling that he really was a great resource for all of you. I mean, that was kind of the. But I it's not necessarily something that's, a burning question that's leaving me unsettled. Just something I wonder about sometimes, is I wonder what the Lord's purpose in that is. You know what I mean? That's all.
Well, the reason I would even hesitate to suggest that you try to search out
No, I'm
those
not
topics
at all.
is because that's also a very difficult thing to navigate, just because of the way Emmanuel taught. It was very rarely in an orderly,
Like I
segmented,
said,
organized fashion.
this is not something I pursue or anything like
Sure.
that. It's just every once in a while, the thought will pop into my head, and I
Yeah.
kind of think about it for a couple seconds. That's all.
Sure.
Just something I sometimes wonder about.
Yeah.
Nothing. Obviously, I have not given up, but I understand the futility of searching for direct answers, things like that.
Sure.
I did have a small question regarding, I guess, my role as an older brother and, I guess, co-individual in my poetry group. So it's Benji, Elijah, my dad Justin, and Liam. And this is, I just want to know my place in this, because it's something I'm noticing, but I don't quite know what to do. And this is for all of you, not just Noah, if you have any ideas. But with Liam's participation, there's a lot of things that we're doing project-wise, we're doing psalms, we're doing papers, poems, etc. And I really want to be able to see what he's doing, just so I can get an insight into. I'd like to know where he's at. You know what I mean? But he kind of, there hasn't really been a lot of pressure to share, which I think is fine. But I think that he has, because of that, hasn't really shared that with any of us in our group. I haven't seen his first psalm, his second psalm, his paper. And then, you know, even when your dad was asking, like, who hasn't shared their psalms yet, I mean, even though I know he has not, he will never raise his hand for things like that. And I don't, obviously, I don't want to force him to do something he's uncomfortable with, but I just wonder, is that something I just, like, let play out on its own? Or is that something I have a role in as an older brother and a co-poetry group person in?
I think it's both, and it's interesting that yesterday Liam did share that much of what holds him back from, say, something like prayer
His judgment.
is the judgment of others. And what may be an opportunity for you guys as a poetry group is to build that trust between yourselves and him. And I mean, not by specifically making it a matter of all of us as a poetry group versus Liam, or, you know, trying to make a thing out of it
I would further
necessarily.
ostracize him, yeah.
It could, but you can still discuss it together, even bring it up as a subject of conversation with Liam present. And that will really depend on how you guys want to bring it up with him, but make it not like a thing where you're trying to crack down on Liam, but you want Liam to know too that this is an opportunity for him, and not even in the sense that this is what we're all doing here, so you need to participate, or else why are you here in the first place?
Yeah.
Unless, of course, there is a time to bring it up in that manner, because sometimes being a little more forthright about it is actually helpful. But so much of it will depend on
How he
the flow of the
perceives it.
conversation and where you're at with him at that time. But that will, I think, ultimately rest on each one of you in his group. That's part of the special nature of that time, is that it's a little bit more intimate than something like,
A meeting.
well, the entire class,
Yeah.
for instance, where there's many different people from the youngest to the oldest, those who he is more and less familiar with. I guess it is still somewhat the case in his group, but you want to build, at least before you introduce the idea of him sharing more than he does, you want to open up the flow of conversation between himself and you, or himself and the rest of you as a group. And I do think that you will play a pretty important role in that. So again, it's not by starting with you should share more, but start with simpler things. Start with smaller, easier things. Not that you're trying to manipulate
Sure.
the situation, but that's just how you build that trust with him.
I see.
Yeah, something he mentioned in my poetry group last time, because I think me and Elijah were both with him, is the environment there was different, and he felt more open and more comfortable to share in that environment, and he did. He was actually very willing to, and everybody in our group was, I would say, pretty encouraged by it, just because he does have a lot on his heart.
Yeah, my worry with that, and I appreciate the advice nonetheless, but I know that my dad and I are probably causes of that fear in him, just because of how our dynamics were in the past. And I think that with us of all people, it's difficult for him to open up like that. You know what I mean?
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I think having you and your dad there. and
It's
maybe,
very-
maybe even Justin. I think there's.
Oh yeah, true. I forgot about
There's a
that.
hesitancy there.
I forgot he's had some run-ins with Justin. Yeah, that's sort of the thing. It's like he'll occasionally, if we like put the spotlight on him, like chime in a couple times with the topics we're going about. But even for the most part in those meetings, he's kind of just like, I don't know how to open the conversation to help him engage without just like cracking down on him, like you said, because that I know doesn't yield anything.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I see a lot of how I once was in him. You know what I mean? And it's for reasons like that I even wonder like why he like genuinely, because I know he has an answer I'm sure that he could say, but I genuinely wonder what it is that keeps him coming here. Because the amount of myself that I see in him, I wouldn't want anything to do with any of this. You know what I mean? So that's it's just things like that. I really love to know where his heart is at, so I know how to like. Not necessarily how to treat him, but like how to meet him where he's at in that,
Mm.
Yeah, I noticed that too in the values. They're I don't even know, I don't think, and he said this himself, I don't think he knows why he values this time, why he values, culture time and worship time, but he values them. They are a sort of priority to him, and I don't think he knows why.
Yeah.
I think part of it stems from a obligation.
Mhm.
That is part of it. But I think there is something deeper that is there. I think God is doing. It sounds. I don't know if it sounds weird, but
I get what
I
you're
feel like
saying.
God's doing what He has been allowed to do.
That makes
I don't
sense
know,
for sure.
because,
No, I get what you're saying
Like
for sure.
Liam's allowance or opening up to God's work in his life. I don't know.
That's like the smallest amount that Liam is letting him in, and God is using that. I get what you're saying.
But again, God can do whatever He wants to do,
Mhm.
even if there is an allowance. And I know, like Amanda used to say about your life, like God's gonna find a way to Jada whether He likes it or not. Like it was just what it was.
That's pretty much what happened. My life kind of got wrecked.
Yeah. But yeah, I speak just from observation. I don't really have any super deep insight into that, but it matters to me for sure because I love Liam and he's a part of our group, and I have been spending more time with him, and I've just noticed these things do matter to him
Yeah.
in a certain way, but there's still a distraction from a lot of other things.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
I will say, for as far as him opening up, it does require patience, as it does with anyone. But
I will certainly give him all of that he needs. I just want to make sure I'm not neglecting my responsibility in any sort of way.
I just started off in my group with asking him very practical questions, as I would anyone else.
Yeah, but like what kind of just examples?
About the
if you could?
topic at hand.
Okay.
Like we were talking about journaling. I didn't ask like Liam, what are you putting it down on paper? I was just like, what's your process? Do you like go in your car? And very things like that. But
I see.
I will say, the main thing that I think actually does get to Liam more than he wants to show is the jokes. I even think of before we started when we were poking at you for their hot chocolate. It's stuff like that doesn't seem like it's a big deal. And this is with anyone. This is not just with Liam.
Yeah.
This is with Hattie, even me, or anyone else would probably say the same thing. It's that slow, innocent jokes where you feel like you're being piled up on, even though that's not necessarily the case. No one means ill,
But
that does bother anyone, and it bothers Liam.
And that's
So-
honestly what came to my mind when you were talking about honor, is those kind of things. Like I wonder how healthy that is for us younger people, with honoring one another,
Yeah.
because I know it really is meant in jest, but I think of even like your nicknames and whatnot, like that people have for you. You know what I mean? Like that's what I honestly thought you might mention during that time. It's just I know it doesn't bother a whole lot of us like consciously, but I do wonder subconsciously, and like you said with the slow building up of those things, what that does for our trust and relationships with one another,
Yeah.
even stemming from that, I think even because I notice you and your dad kind of like try to kind of urge Liam on to speak about things, and I think even a part of that, even like we were saying, is from maybe a past way of life. He doesn't really know where your guy's heart is when you're encouraging him. and because I don't know, I feel like it really depends on Liam's relationship with us too, because
Oh, for sure.
and that's goes for all of us too. We need to know each other's hearts. That's really important because at that point we know where things are really coming from when we talk to each other, when we
Yeah.
do things. Even when we do, I agree with the joking thing. It
Mhm.
needs to be whatever. But again, if knowing somebody's heart is really important because you know where things are really coming from and why it should matter to you.
Yeah, and there's also a place of it needs to be something that we, and this is talking about Liam, but this is for everyone, that they have a decision to make where they are almost let to wander a little bit, obviously within the guards that are set, but where they need to come to a decision where they have seen one way of life and they see the way of life that the Lord is calling them to, and that they, with, I would say, minimal outside influence, they make that decision that this is what's important to me. This is what, I want to give my life back to the Lord. And that is something that is actually a decision that they fully made on their own. Because that's going to be way more honorable and encouraging when there's no outside influence there,
And you
and there's
can't
no push
coerce
there.
something like that. Yeah, exactly.
If it's genuine.
Mhm.
And so there is going to be that season of, I would say, wandering a little bit. You're finding what's important to you,
Mhm.
and I think that's where Liam is.
Oh,
And-
yeah, for sure. I just know how I was, and I know that if it were me, I know that really any influence from another person would probably be received negatively. So I just didn't know if that was my place for Liam, or if there's a more active role I should be trying to be taking. I just
But
wanted
the
to know.
difference there was that you started to understand where, well, maybe, I don't know, it seems like you started to understand where people's hearts for you were, right? Where those things were coming from and why they mattered.
Yeah, I think with that there was, I remember the only
Maybe my question is what changed, if like,
really, it was when any sort of my mom honestly just straight up stopped asking me to go to these sort of things. And I think that is when that our relationship could start to try to heal. Is there was never any pressure to attend any Tuesday, any Wednesday, anything like that. They just straight up there was no anything. There was no asking, nothing. And once that happened, it felt at least I could hold, I could interact with the person without feeling oh, they're gonna try to get me to do X.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think once that happened, then other things could happen. And during those hard times, I felt like I at least had somebody I could fall back on that wasn't just gonna say, I know you're struggling right now, but you should really try and do this and attend this, you know what I mean? Instead, it was just I know I can lean on this person, and they're not gonna try and get me to do anything or attend anything.
That's trust.
For sure. And I guess that's my question is what do I yeah, I don't know. I guess
I'd
it's
say in
gonna
that
be a matter of
process
knowing
with your
Liam.
brother, it's gonna, I don't think there's anything else you can do but be a brother the right way.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
and it's up to him and how he's gonna receive that. I don't think there's something better you can be doing.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know your specific role, but I would say generally it's to be someone that proves themselves to be there,
Mhm.
but not to insert themselves. Obviously,
Yeah, that's fair.
there's probably specifics to that, but it takes patience, and I think it takes, like you were saying, space.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord works in the solitude of yourself and your own way, and you see your own way. And when, if the Lord allows, you see your own way for what it really is. And Liam has already expressed many times to me and in essays and stuff like that he sees a lot of that stuff. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I do appreciate all of your feedback. Certainly. I just wasn't sure with, I didn't want to treat him too much how my default of, I wanted counsel before just, assuming how I should be interacting and treating with him. So I appreciate all of your feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing Noah
I know it's not
mentioned
formulaic, but
is a lot of our communication and the way we relate with Liam is a lot on his own terms. I don't even know if you remember sending me that text, but
oh, I recall you mentioning that to me though.
yeah, there's kind of this familiar way that we do things with him, which is very goofy and very poke fun and make fun. And I think that always meeting him there is unproductive and really only does bad things. So even being willing to break out of that or to relate in a more sincere way, it doesn't have to be talking about anything meaningful, but even the way that I approach Liam, like just in a very genuine way, it doesn't have to be goofy. And it sounds very basic, but I would say for our family, that's not our default way of like, you know, how are you, man? You have a good day at the gym? Tell me what's going on. It doesn't have to be anything.
I mean, I 100% know what you're talking about, and I remember that conversation you and I had a while back about that, and I think I really have been trying that with a lot of you guys, because I wanted to change that default. Something I did notice when it comes to building someone's trust is a lot of times I feel like when you have a scenarios like Liam's, you have this complex, I guess, or maybe this is just me, I don't know, that you need to like help him in some sort of way. You know what I mean? Like, oh, there's something I need to do for him. What I've realized a lot of the time is that more than anything, if you put yourself in a scenario where they feel like they can help you, that fosters so much more trust. I know I did that. I actually recognized that with you because I remember it was that one Tuesday where I came in harboring some bad things, and you and Tim kind of like, not lectured me, but you know what I mean, kind of like explained that that's not going to be acceptable in this environment.
Yeah.
And I remember that car ride home with you. I mean, that was the first time I feel like you and I even had a conversation because you were just offering me advice and like, yeah, I get it. You know, and I think that's when that really clicked for me. And it's just been small things with Liam. Like I asked for his help with my computer because he knows a lot more about that stuff with me, or I'll ask him some advice about good exercises for certain muscle groups and stuff like that. But if that is just my place in his life, then I am totally okay with letting the Lord do his work and me just trying to be a good brother to him. If that's all my
being
place.
Being a brother in flesh and in spirit is really, and that's.
Yeah.
What's interesting is a long time ago. Sorry, I were just talking about Liam, I guess. But yeah. I talked with your mom, and she said that I had some place in Liam's life that was important. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna spend time with him. I'm gonna talk about these really deep things and just see, you know.
Yeah.
And like I did, I went out on a few times. It was really quiet when I talked about certain subjects, and then I went sat down with Emmanuel. I was like, "What do you? That's not your place. Like you need to be careful what you're doing here. It wasn't God led in a way. I didn't have bad intentions, obviously.
You were going ahead of God
right
in that way. Okay, I see.
Yeah. So, and then Emmanuel just said, just kind of relating to what I said just a minute ago, is that you just need to be a brother to Liam. Like that's all. That's really what needs to happen here. Like there's no forcibly let's talk about God things kind of thing, because that's not even the way God. I don't think. Well, it really depends on what God is leading you to do.
Most of the time, though,
that is not how
and
God
that's
works.
not how He was leading that. But I mean, I even noticed the other day, I went out to eat dinner with Liam, and we just kind of ate dinner together, and he just, it was funny. He was all like bashful about it too. He was like, he was just telling me thanks for hanging out with me, and like, I don't know, he's just not used to saying that, and I could tell, but. And that was kind of an indicator to me that way of interacting, just trying to be a brother to somebody,
kind of forced him out of that familiar zone.
right? Mm-hmm. And it's not like I'm also not trying to just be a good buddy to Liam and be some cool friend. Mm-hmm. That's not what it is either. There's also a very intentional. There's something that goes without words, and it is going to come from my heart, from your heart to Liam, and when you're interacting with him, not just because it's interacting with him in the way that it's not a humanistic love.
No, I get what you're saying.
It's something that's deeper than that. It's not going to come through what you say to him particularly. It's really going to come through your actions. And I think that makes a huge impact.
Yeah, I think I have some more clarity on this now. Thank you. I think it's definitely going to be striking a balance between not forcing yourself or overexerting. And I'm sorry I made this about Liam, but I think this goes for any of us.
Yeah, this is
Just
a
with-
bigger picture.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of just not forcing yourself, as you
Mhm.
said, but then also not engaging in a familiar way. And I think there's a very practical way to exist in that middle ground, where if he wants to come to you, absolutely about those things, but if he does not, the door is just always open,
Mhm.
and to not, like you saying, engage with Liam on his own terms in that way. you
Yeah.
know?
And this is not to obviously single.
No,
anyone out,
like I was saying,
I
this
think
is not-
that what is being talked about really applies to how to engage in certain relationships
Mhm.
and really understanding where the Lord has you in that person's life.
Mhm.
And I think that that's very important for anyone to seek the Lord on that. But
Yeah,
Is it-
what's being described, I think, is really honor. You guys are talking about what it means to honor
To
someone.
honor Liam, that's
Yeah.
a good point.
And well, just the way of expression that Elijah's talking about that goes
Mhm.
beyond words or actions, even. It's just the heart for somebody.
Mhm.
I remember a conversation with Emmanuel as well that I had where I don't remember much of it, but I was just reminded of something that Noah said as well, with the honor being like the foundation of the culture. You know, it was one of those times where I was talking to him and I was kind of just like having these thoughts, and I brought it up to him and he would be like, yeah, that's right. And so I was explaining honor as something that is like an understanding of a right order of relationships. So like, it's almost like an unseen thing that is like a foundation of how you understand life. You know,
Mhm.
you understand a lot about yourself and where you are and where others are, and that's how ultimately you're able to engage and honor people, is because you have a understanding of who they are. Like, I mean, even I think it applies to family culture very much, and also to the community, you know, understanding who, you know, where Tim is, you know, compared to Noah, or compared to Nicole, you know, like just understanding the order that God places people in.
Mhm.
And that's how you can really start to honor people, is when you understand their positioning, I guess.
That's the relational EQ Tim was talking about.
Yeah.
There's an important distinction to make there as far as learning to honor others. That can actually be a source of confusion if we're to think that honoring others or relating to others in the proper way is us figuring out what they're supposed to be to us and then acting accordingly. It actually should be what we are supposed to be to them,
Well,
because
that's-
ultimately that's really all that we have the prerogative to act in and upon.
I mean, that's exactly what I was asking you. How, as an older brother, how do I act towards
Yeah.
Liam? That's exactly how I wanted.
And most may think that seeing Liam as this problematic, troublesome person, if they're to think in that way, that we begin either by thinking that Liam is just a silly guy compared to everyone else or to myself, and then we treat him
As such.
according
Mhm.
to that conception of him or perception of him, or I consider what I should be in relation to him. You see the difference
Oh,
in the
for
starting
sure.
point?
Yeah.
And so that is what you brought up, is how am I to relate to Liam? Less a question of how should Liam relate to me. And that's why it is a very good question. Of course, we kind of went down the idea of the way you guys can come together as a poetry group to help open doors of communication for him sharing more during that time. But of course, your relationship to him as a brother goes beyond the poetry group interaction. As much of an opportunity, as I said, that might turn out to be. That's a thing you can approach in so many beneficial and helpful ways. For instance, bringing it up to your own father, or discussing it more with Isaac. How to. I think that's actually something we talked a little bit about, Jaden, a few months ago.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, as far as learning to exercise that role that you've been given in your household, that's something that I think would really benefit from more conversation with someone like Isaac. Having similar conversations really to the one we're having now, actually, just it being a concern, a real and genuine topic of interest between you. That's the details, the how do we go forward from here will play out from those times. There's not anything that
There's
can
no
give
formula.
you now per se, except that know that it's as silly and as obvious as this sounds, know that it is a role that you have. It's because of your family history, your own individual background. That is something that is not a default for you yet. And to realize that and move in the direction of it becoming something you have fully realized in yourself, that really is the next step.
I mean, that's kind of why I wanted to ask, because I just know there's a lot of older siblings in this room for the most part. Because I definitely am able to take a more passive role if that's what is needed. But like our conversation was prior, my issue wasn't necessarily that, but not actually taking enough of an active role as an older brother.
Sure.
And so I wanted to just make sure there was, in that way, nothing I was missing or something that I needed to be. Do you get what I'm saying? And so I think I have a better picture painted because of you guys. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to say, too, to qualify what I mentioned moments ago, as far as it not being your default, there are, in reality, many things about you and the relationships that you've established amongst your siblings that is very healthy, actually. And that goes even further back to the way that your family once did things. There's still that place you have had in their lives as the eldest brother that has established some very good connections between, say, people like you and your sister, or I would say, I guess, primarily between just what I've been able to notice between you and Hattie, and then a little less obvious but still present between yourself and your brothers. Those are good things to search out and to be aware of too. Don't lose that. Make that something you aim to strengthen, to make I guess more visible to yourself and to your brother in question, whether that be Liam, who we've talked more about today, or even Isaac and Niles. Every individual is its own center of observation or attention or intention. So
yeah, and I definitely not necessarily have been I guess you could say being intentional with trying to ease that open with Niles a little more. And it's definitely, I appreciate how receptive he is. I think there's good work being done even with just him interacting with you guys so much. I see a very slow especially with how he used to be. And it is a lot easier, I think, for me to be like, it's just been small things. I've just been talking to him about, Smash or whatever. But like, that's better than we were a year ago. I feel like I've barely spoken with him. And so thank you.
There are a lot of, I would say, seemingly small shifts from the outside that are happening within I would say each one of them, probably us too, but yeah, it's even like down to the certain tones of voice, or maybe even the way they look at you or talk to you during certain interactions that are just encouraging.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take the whole conversation and make it about our family, but
No, it's not just about our family.
Yeah.
I think that can be.
something I
As
was.
you guys mentioned a few times, this is something that we can reapply to the way we look at any of our relationships, particularly those within this community. One thing I wanted to emphasize again is the playful attitude that we have towards each other most of the time. Looking at, I guess as a case study, someone like Liam, what I really see that he values most, what even keeps him coming to any of our gatherings, is us. It's his relationships. That's what I think really matters to him. That's what is kind of the lifeline for him, if you will.
Which I think isn't a bad place to be necessarily.
No. But and this may be a little reminiscent of my dad's conversation yesterday, as far as we learned to, as far as learning to relate to the Lord goes. But if you don't know a person well, some clear evidence of that would be the fact that every time you guys begin a conversation, it's like the same topic. And for Liam, that is almost exclusively silly talk for us. And so I want it to be known to everyone that it is actually mostly on us that Liam is where he's at as far as his relationships go. It's not completely on us. There are still things that Liam holds back, or that he doesn't pursue. But that's the only way he really knows how to relate to. I think you mentioned that a little bit ago. That's the only way he really knows how to interact with us. And there's still remnants of that, actually, in the interactions we have amongst one another.
Yeah, it's like a pattern.
Yeah. I don't think it will necessarily look like the total eradication of anything amusing or humorous
Oh,
in
yeah.
our conversation.
I mean, that's just not genuine at that point.
No.
I just
But-
don't think it should be the automatic default intro way of interacting with
Yeah,
people.
as with most things, is like, as far as habits of mind go, it's not an issue of nipping off the bad fruit that we see manifest in our interactions, but really trying to discover what the root of that kind of thinking is. And through time and continued interaction, it you could say evolves into something new, and by that means stays genuine. It's not us again trying to deal with the obvious things as much as it is changing the heart we have towards one another, growing into a more mature heart towards those who we love and respect most. And I do believe part of that comes from a renewed perspective on honor towards each other.
Yeah, I think it shows, like, at the core, it's like how we view each other.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to shift, and I think it is shifting. It's not going to be this instant thing, but that's even with, like, the language we use, like Tim mentioned, like probably a year ago at this point, with the bro talk. You know, it's things like that display a mindset of a way of looking at each other and therefore honoring each other, that is still very, I would say, familiar, or you can say worldly.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all bad, but that being the default keeps you there. You're always going to be stuck on that base way.
Yeah, I think that is a mindset thing, because I think intentionally trying to change your language in that way and intentionally, not joking around or whatever, I feel like that actually puts you backwards. I feel like that's even less of a relationship, because then you're just not being genuine with one another. I think it's really just an individual analyzing of all of our mindsets. How do we view and treat each other,
Mm-hmm.
And I think just being aware of those things. I think it's exactly like you said, finding the root, not just snipping off the bad fruit. Because I think if any of us try to I feel like it'll be very awkward if all of us take away from this, like, well, okay, I mean, I'm not going to joke, I'm not going to refer to you as this or that, or do any of these things. I feel like if you look at it like that, it's just going to create an environment that's very stiff and awkward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The stiffness and awkwardness, too, I think will most often come from our thought patterns, what we expect from one another. Because a quiet room with some individuals is really awkward, but a quiet room with other individuals is not seen as an awkward thing. When I say quiet, I don't mean like everyone's silent, just staring at each other. But I mean that when we expect from one another, when we get to this place, a conversation of greater value and thought and of higher quality, then the absence of those things which used to just fill in that vacuum of silence is not a thing that is awkward to us anymore in the way that it absolutely would be right now. Simply because we fill in that void because we're afraid of the silence.
Yeah, there's an interesting connection between like silence and trust. There's something. There's like an evenness in a relationship when there's that trust there, where silence is not awkward.
I remember a good friend I had in back in Texas. We'd pretty much known each other our whole lives. Some of my best memories with him, we would just be at a park and it would be like, nice day out. We'd just kind of like lay down on a bench or something, and we kind of just sit in silence and like just, being next to one another in each other's company was just refreshing.
Yeah. So these are, I guess, 2 points that you can further consider, especially if, say, you're anticipating interactions with others, is one, right thinking, and the other, the power of silence. And understand silence to not merely mean you're forcing yourself not to say things, but more that you are applying much more careful consideration to the things that you have an urge to say by habit. And I guess the first thing I mentioned could actually be the third point, that being that you anticipate you anticipate interactions with people. It sounds like maybe too simplistic a thing, but for the most of our interactions that we have throughout the week are interactions that we expect to have, that we go to have, that there's an interim of time between us knowing that we are going to interact with someone and our ultimate interaction with them. Much of that time is actually filled by the drive to go see that person or pick them up or meet them wherever we're going to meet them. That time can be used for thinking about what that interaction is going to look like. How much of us do that?
I do it accidentally, but that's just
Yeah.
I think about things probably too much.
Yeah.
It feels like overthinking, but maybe it's not.
I feel like for me it depends on who it is, because the more familiar it is, I feel like the less you're gonna do that.
It's
Yeah.
kind of interesting thinking about that though, because like it almost is like using that way of expectation. So if you're like thinking about how it could be and then it's not met, then that's another way of like disappointment.
But that's
reality.
the important thing is how you are going about thinking through it and anticipating it. It's not how can I achieve some result from this. It should not be result based thinking.
That's just not how
That
relationships
ultimately
are.
will just turn into manipulation
Mhm.
and unmet expectations, which further leads to unhappiness and discontentment.
Mhm.
That would actually just further complicate things. It should be that chunk of time of considering and anticipating an interaction should be actually self-reflective. Like, what is the attitude of my heart looks like? It goes back into that principle of being sure you know what it looks like to relate to another, not trying to figure out how they should be relating to you. Thinking along those lines. That's a thing I admittedly don't do nearly as much as I would like to do. Even in a meeting like we have this morning, or a meeting like the Young Brothers, or other times where we actually gather together more formally, not quite as casually as we would on other occasions. It is, I would say, required of me as someone that leads such times, or at least facilitates them, to think those things through. I'm not relating to any one of you in the right way if I'm not doing that. That's the way I think about it. That's a standard I hold against myself.
Funny that you mentioned that, because you were actually, especially with my interactions with you, I'd say I do it with everyone for the most part, but it's like very often when I interact with you, I'm honestly mostly examining myself with how I am meeting you. Because I feel like with my interactions with you, you've had an uncanny ability to like see me, and I'm like, what is he gonna see? You know, where am I at actually? Let me take a minute to observe this. I think it kind of started out as like more of an unnerving thing, like, uh-oh, where am I at? You know, but I think it's over time shifted into like, you know, he's gonna probably see where I am. Where am I? Let's get an honest evaluation of how this is going to go. And that's been in times where you've come over just to, you know, work out at our gym, or more
Sure.
more formal meetings, stuff like that. I mean, you inspire that within me more often than not.
And that's what I would like us each to be able to do with one another, especially those at this table. And I'm being serious about that. There's a reason that we are a select few who gather during this time to discuss these sort of things. I don't know if I mentioned this in the first meeting we had together, but it's not simply because it seemed like the right thing and we're kind of more of the on the older side of the young people. I mean, those definitely count, but there's a place of spiritual interest and maturity that we have been brought to that begin to demand these same kind of observations and conversations amongst one another. And I say demand because it is literally what is required of you as someone who is an active and willing participant in what God's doing in this people. And so this is, as I put it in my class one time, the simple and natural consequence of your engagement, your volunteering, if you will, in this work.
Well said.
And it should not be felt or carried by you as if it's something that what's the right word? I am describing it as a duty-based thing,
it
but
shouldn't
but
be
not something that
necessarily-
you are fulfilling as a duty simply by being here. It's all about your engagement, right?
Mhm.
It's required of you to open up in this way as someone that is required, if you will, to participate in the time. And I want you guys to not take these words like duty and required and demanded in the wrong light. It is required and demanded of you insofar as you are wanting to be a part of God's work. Does that make sense?
I was gonna say, I think it's like a required to like have a desire for
Yeah.
that.
Well, I
It's
mean-
not, yeah.
Required in the sense that you are an employee at Granny's.
Mhm.
It is required and demanded of you to come to work when you're scheduled, right? But as a person, you can, of course, simply say, no, I don't want to go to work today. How many times do you end up doing that to where me, Isaac, or Elaine say, okay, you're fired then. You can't work anymore. Why should we think of God's work to be any different?
Mm.
That's the duty I'm talking about. Anyways, as far as that ties back into what you were saying earlier, we want to be very careful and diligent to observe the fruits that are being produced even from such a time as this, because if they're lacking, then there's something that is,
In the root.
well, lacking even on your part
Mm.
as a participant of this time.
I think you get out of it as much as you put into it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the keen insight that we should be having in one another,
Mhm.
even these specific people here, is what kind of fruit is being produced in you? What kind of engagement am I seeing in your participation during this time? Because if it's lacking or if it's missing something, then I'm going to point it out for your sake, actually, and for the sake of everyone else in this time.
Mm-hmm.
So be willing to do that and also be ready to receive it too.
Agreed. Real quick,
Uh-huh.
Kayla, just because we haven't heard, is she can hear? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious. What does your, like, as an older sister, how do you go about interacting? Just kind of wanted to hear from you specifically because I feel like while not identical, it is I guess sort of a similar relationship dynamic that you might have with him.
Yeah, for sure. I was just actually thinking about that when you brought that up. But I do feel like I'm in the same boat as you, brother, and I'm just really encouraged by what you shared because I definitely don't think I have everything all figured out, and I think I'm just kind of in the same boat trying to figure out how I can be just a help to him in this season of life because I think there is a part where I just have to be there and kind of be willing to listen, even when my advice I do think some things I have to share with him is wisdom because I've obviously walked out some of the same things as he's going through. But I feel like the Lord's really been teaching me just to listen and not need to like tell him all the things I quote unquote know,
Mm-hmm.
but just kind of waiting for him to want, if I'm making sense. Like
Yeah,
I hope
for sure.
I'm kind of looping back. But
No, I
I
agree.
think just even being that example to my other siblings, not only Caden,
Mm-hmm.
but just so they could even see the example by me, having patience and being someone they can come to. Am I making sense?
Yeah, for
I feel
sure.
like
Yeah.
I'm kind of just
No.
repeating myself at this point.
No,
but
not at all.
yeah, I really am encouraged by what you guys had to share, and especially Jaden,
Thank you.
you sharing that, because I definitely feel like I'm going through the same exact thing. And my heart is to be genuine, wanting to share those things with my siblings and be in a relationship, but I really do want to go about it in the right way.
For sure. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank
Or
you.
sorry if I'm a little all over the place. But
No, you're good. I want to say too that please always feel free to share your thoughts along the concerns you have for your family and your siblings in particular, especially as those who we're not able to see quite as often. We always want to hear from you, Kayla, the observations that you have about your siblings, the way that things are going in your household. That we would absolutely want to make that a subject of conversation together, overview. Even use it in the similar way that we did with Liam, as a kind of case study if such things come up that we can explore together, because that's your family is still and will continue to be a on our hearts, just a concern to us. Not in that there's not a concern just in that there's always something troublesome going on, but a concern in that, like I said, you guys are on our hearts. So please know that there's always an openness on our part to hear about that.
yes, thank you so much. I really do appreciate that, because I always wonder if that is something that I meant to bring. And sometimes
yes.
I felt that I've been a little hesitant to share those things.
Yeah, that's in large
But
part
I
what
mean,
this time is for.
My
So
heart is to share that with you guys, and I want to be vulnerable
Please
in
do.
that way.
Yep.
And I really do appreciate the support, especially with Caden in this season of life, because as the older sibling, I do see him struggle, and it does break my heart for him. But just to have the understanding, and I hope that he will someday understand that I know in part what he's going through, but also just to be, I don't know, I think just having the support from you guys, not only for me, but even for Caden, is a huge blessing, even though he doesn't know it. And I do want to just take a moment to praise the Lord, because he did come with my mom and is going to come to worship night tonight.
nice.
And I'm just beyond thankful that the Lord has let him to come. And I'm very sad I can't be there to support him in person. But I'm here in spirit, and I just, it's just been such a hard and beautiful season. So I do want to share that with you guys, and I'm sure you guys will see him later. But I think maybe even just keeping him on your mind tonight would be a blessing, and just our family in general. But
Thank you for sharing
guys a
that.
lot. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, Kayla, do you mind praying for us to wrap it up here?
I would love to. Father, I cannot express how thankful I am to have this time with my brothers and sisters. I can never think of one meeting I've had coming away empty and not feeling unsatisfied or not filled with your blessing and your Holy Spirit. Lord, I do just pray over our time together as we continue, and that we would learn to be a safe place for one another, and that we wouldn't feel that we would not feel obligated or like a burden to share our sorrows and sufferings with one another. I do pray that outside of our time here together, but as the culture center as a whole in this community, I just pray that our hearts would be willing and wanting to share what you have put on our hearts, and to really suffer and walk alongside each other. I just thank you for everything you are revealing to us in this season of life. I pray over tonight and all the hearts that come in, and that they would not leave bearing nothing, but that you would be with them. I just want to continue to invite you to the times we have together, and that your spirit would be present tonight. I do ask for healing in everyone's body over this sickness, if it be your will. And I just continue to ask for a blessing over just each one of our lives, and that this time would be set apart, and we wouldn't take it as something familiar or just something we do. I just pray against the mindset of familiarity, because each of these hearts and minds are not my friends or someone I happen to come and see every week, but they are my siblings, my brothers and sisters, and more importantly, your children. And I pray that nothing in my heart would want to treat them in a familiar way. So, Lord, I just thank you so much for this family you have given me and that you have given us. I just pray for your will to be done in all the things you do, and that we would not stand in the way of your true plan, and that we would come and walk alongside you and one another. Amen.
Amen.
Man,
Man,
I would like to say, while I am your brother first, I'd still also like to be your friend. I don't think God stops us from doing that. I'm just teasing you. I know what you meant, but